Hi there, it's Sycamore and Cotton back this week with a rusty, crusty, jumping straight into autumn video for you. This is Kathy and I've got so much I want to show you. Welcome to all of you who are here. If you are new, I'm so glad that you found me and I hope that you'll keep coming back and also check out the other videos in my channel. And for those who are returning, welcome back. I'm so glad to see you again. Now let's get started. I'm starting off with this first project by making some air dry clay castings of this sunflower mold. As you know, if you've ever used any kind of mold and air dry clay, you need to brush your mold with cornstarch before putting the clay in there. That helps for a smoother release when you are ready to take out the casting that you've made. You also want to make sure that you've got your air dry clay pressed in there very firmly. I like to start with a piece that is large enough to fill the mold, and I start by warming it up in my hand, just rolling it around and getting it kind of warm so that it's softer and more pliable. And then I just kind of flatten it out a little bit so that it will, I can push it down into the mold and then start spreading the air dry clay out and along the edges, pushing it over the edge of the mold and pulling away any of the excess clay. That was a tool that I use to kind of flatten it out when I've got it too thick in some places. I also use it to kind of help press down to flatten the back. And I just keep going until I get it to where I think it's in a good place where there aren't any thin spaces or messy edges. When you're ready to unmold, you just flip it over and let gravity do the work. See how easily that came out? Next, I'll be using Tight Bond quick and thick glue and spreading it all over the back of the mold, or the casting rather, and applying it to this 2x4 piece of wood. I had gotten out my miter saw the other day. It's been a while since I've done any wood projects, and went through my wood stash and just cut up some different sizes of 2x4s. And for this particular project, I have cut a set of 3. They are 9 inches, 7.5 inches, and 6 inches, or approximately those measurements. And now I am attaching it to the 2x4, and as you'll see here, I have it spilling over the side so that just a part of the casting shows on the front. I really like to have a design flow over onto the side or the top. And air dry clay is perfect for that. You can't really do it with your castings that you make from resin unless you do it in the very early stage of pouring the resin, or when it has started hardening but isn't completely hard. Sometimes it's a little bendable at that point. I haven't tried it myself yet, but I have seen others do it. And also transfers work really well that way. You can, and I like to actually often let them spill over the edges of whatever I'm working on as well, and extend the design. I like to go ahead and paint the casting before it dries. Now, if there's a whole lot of detail, you may want to wait until there's a little bit of a hard crust on the casting, and that'll help to prevent you from messing up any details. But if you're using a soft brush and go about it gently, it's usually okay to go ahead and put that paint on as soon as you get it applied to the piece you're working on and any of the glue cleared away. If any glue seeps out underneath the casting, you always want to make sure you clean it up first, because it will show in your finished project if you don't. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just applying 1 coat of Waverly paint in the color Plaster. So that was the tallest of the 3 blocks that I cut, and I'm going to work on getting the castings for the other 2 blocks and getting them applied and that first coat of paint. I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead to the next step of the process. So I let that dry overnight on that first block, and when I came back in the next day, there was some separation of some of the clay, and what I'm done here in that little cup is I've made a slurry of clay with water, and it just makes you can paint it on, or you can take a piece of air dry clay and fit it down into the places that have pulled away. But I like to use the slurry and then just paint it in, and you may need to go back over it a couple of times, but for me it works better than me trying to get a piece of air dry clay fit into a small space and trying to make it look natural. So I do that most of the time when I'm using air dry clay. And now here I am finishing up some attaching the pieces to this second piece. I love this particular casting of the sunflower, and again, I love the color of the white air dry clay against that aged wood. That's so pretty. It almost makes me wish I had left it like that. But let's go ahead to the next step. After the slurry had dried, I then applied the second coat of Waverly paint in the color Plaster. And I'm going to be using this spindle that I will cut down into smaller pieces to use as the stems for pumpkins, because all three of these are going to be made into a set of pumpkins. Now, I could have left them the way that they are, and I think they would still be fine, but I thought that since it's pumpkin season, let's go ahead and add a stem to them. And so I took the spindle out, cut that down, and as you can see here, I am adding some brown glaze, antiquing glaze, to where I made the cuts so that that fresh wood cut would not be showing. And I only do it on one end because the other end will be glued to the top of the 2x4s. Next, I'm going to use a little bit of sandpaper to lightly distress. I like to see the corners distressed, and then I'll wipe that off, any of the sanding dust. And next is going to be applying the Sweet Pickens oil wax. No, actually I decided not to use the Sweet Pickens oil wax, and instead I'm using that same brown glaze, the antiquing brown glaze. It's by Pentart, and it's pretty thick and heavy, so I poured out some mineral spirits to try to thin it down a little bit, and the mineral spirits just did not work with that. So actually, just using water thinned it out a lot better than the mineral spirits. I guess because it's a water-based product, the water worked better. I'm not sure, but here I am applying it. It goes on so dark, and I might have preferred that it was a lighter glaze, but as it is, I went with it. And as soon as I got it on, I started wiping it off, and I did start liking it better. It really lays into those details a lot better. But I do a section at a time so that I can wipe it as quickly as possible so that it doesn't have time to make it too dark. And then once I do get it applied, I'll actually pull out a wet wipe and start taking off even more of the glaze. It's kind of amazing just how much the wet wipe, how well it works in pulling off more of that glaze. I sanded the top a little bit after I had gotten glaze on it, because I wasn't thinking when I put the glaze on there, you really don't want to have a glaze or a wax on your project when you're going to be using glue. You want it to be applied to the raw wood as much as possible. So I kind of jumped over that, and here I am using the Tight Bond on one part of the spindle, and then a little bit of the super glue with the accelerator spray so that the spindle would adhere immediately. And another step that I'm doing there was to do a dry brush of the plaster and just brighten up that sunflower a little bit more. I had torn a strip from some cotton fabric that had some nice fall colors in it and was tying that on for a bow just to see how that would look. But I ended up taking it off because I also want to put some Spanish moss and curlicues around the stem before tying the ribbon on. I love this wire that is coated in brown paper. I use that to make the tendrils, the curlicues that I just mentioned. Anytime I'm doing fall arrangements or pumpkins. I just cut a piece of it and then wrap it around usually a paintbrush, the end of a paintbrush, and then just pull the paintbrush out, and you can leave it as curly as you want it or stretch it out, and it just adds a nice little touch, I think, and it's one of my favorite things to do with fall projects like this. Here I was just hot gluing those little tendrils down, but honestly I don't know why I didn't just wrap it around the stem. But anyway, once I get it glued down, then I'm also putting the Spanish moss down, and then next I will tie the ribbon around it, pull it really tight, and I'm not going to tie a bow. I'm just going to leave those ends as they are, trimming them back, and there you go. That's the first block finished. I finish up the other two in the same way, and here they are. Let me know what you think. The two larger ones are my favorites of the three. I'll be putting these on my Etsy shop. I also plan to make them in other colors. So if there's a color you would like to see, let me know. Next project is making over this galvanized bucket. I had thrifted it, but it came from a dollar store or a Family Dollar store or Dollar Tree, I'm not sure, but it wasn't a very expensive item to start with, and I thrifted it for I think $1.99. And it has wooden handles, and it's in decent shape. It's got a picture on the front. I think it's a fall print on the front, just, you know, black with the galvanized tin. And I love this apothecary color by DIY, especially when it's got an antiquing wax on it and it darkens it up. I have 2 cans of it, or 2 jars. This is obviously almost empty and had dried up a little bit, so I just squirted some water in there. And that's the great thing about this kind of paint. If it starts drying up or getting too thick, you can just add water and stir it really well and just reconstitute it. And that's what I'm doing here. And I had the other bottle is completely full and hasn't even been opened, but as you've heard me say before, I like to make the best use out of all of my products, and I got that thinned down. So yeah, so it's a fresh flower market. It's got that cute little truck on it, but I really wanted to do something different with it for fall. And honestly, as I'm putting this paint on, I'm not even 100% sure what I'll do. I just kind of decide as I go along. Sometimes that gets me in trouble and I end up backtracking and redoing things, and sometimes it works out just fine. And this is actually one of the projects that it ended up being just fine, and I'm very happy with the way this turned out. In fact, out of these 3 projects for today's video, this is my favorite. You all let me know what's your favorite in the comments. Before painting, I did take it outside and sprayed it down with a clear spray, giving something for the paint to adhere to better. And I apply 2 coats, letting it dry between each coat. I remembered that I had a few pieces, maybe just 2 or 3 pieces left of this transfer that is by Prima Redesign, and I think it's called Dried Wildflowers. So I pull off this piece, which is half of a wreath shape, but I had already used the other half, and this was all that I had that would be fitting for this pail or this bucket, and just sizing it up to see if it would work on the front, and I think it works perfectly. So I just removed the backing, which is the white paper that you can see there, and then I use the tool that comes with the transfer packets and start rubbing over and lifting as I go and leaving the transfer attached to the bucket. After getting it applied, I use some of that vellum to then lightly rub over it and just make sure that everything is adhered. I did spray this with a clear spray before I applied the transfer. With IOD transfers, you don't have to do that, but I could tell in the beginning that this transfer by Prima was probably going to give me some issues without having a sealant on the paint. This is really as far as I had thought about what to do with this. I hadn't gotten any further in what I would do, so as I'm looking at it, I realize this really needs something more. And it's at that point that I decide to apply the fine line crackle that is by PintArt. It's a two-step process, and this first step is applying this glue-like medium to the whole surface because I want a fine line crackle across the whole surface of this bucket. And then once that dries, I will come back in with step 2. Then I decided to paint the handles white, and it's chalk paint, so there'll be a bit of a crackle on that. The chalk paint I had left over from another project and I wanted to use it. So I put 2 coats of that on to get a good crackle on it. And I used my hairdryer between each coat to force the crackling. Next up is applying step 2 of PintArt's Fine Line Crackle, and it's a kind of amber colored medium, and you apply it in the same way. It is thinner, so it's a little runny, so you do have to make sure that you don't apply too much because you don't want to have drips. And again, I pull out my hairdryer to make it faster because I'm impatient, and also because the heat from the hairdryer will help force the crackle. But mainly I do it because I'm impatient and I want to get this finished. Otherwise, I probably would have had to leave it for a few hours at least. Now I am applying some of Sweet Pickin's dark oil wax. I had poured some in this little cup and there was some left over, so I'm using it to brush all along the outside of the container where I've painted. And then I decide I want something a little darker than that, so even without rubbing off the Sweet Pickin's oil wax, I get out the PintArt antiquing glaze and apply that over top, and then I start wiping it back with a shop towel, getting a really nice aged look and a crackle to this project. I'm really pleased with the crackle I got. And that bright galvanized tin now needs to be painted all over, so I decided to paint the bottom with some green that I had mixed, kind of an olive green that I had mixed up for another project and had sitting there, and it really worked well for that. It took 2 coats to cover it, and the mix of that included a fusion paint, and I think that's why it adhered so well to this galvanized metal. And I decided to do the inside as well, again 2 coats. And I had left the very top rim and the bottom edge as well of this bucket in the galvanized color, and so I also had to paint over that and get rid of all that galvanized look. I also applied some of the dark wax to the handles because obviously I couldn't have those bright white handles, and I did have that crackle that I wanted to highlight, so I did that. And then I use a rusty crusty method that I love to use, and what I do is I take my Mod Podge, I brush a little bit on to the places where it would naturally form a rust, and then I sprinkle cinnamon. That's all this is. That's all that this rust is. No chemicals, nothing expensive, just a bottle of the $1 cinnamon that you can get from the Dollar Tree. And using that Mod Podge or any other glue that dries clear just brush it on in the places where you want to rust. So for me, that was all along the bottom edge, all along the top edge, along the handles, the metal part of the handles. And once I've applied it, the cinnamon, I do go back over it and cover it with more Mod Podge, and that helps to set it so that it's not flaking or falling off. And it also deepens that rusty color and I think it looks really authentically rusty. What do you think? And have you ever used this method? What's your favorite method for rusting if you indeed like that look of rusty crusty? It's a pretty messy job, no doubt about it. And I should have laid down a paper to do that on, but I didn't have one handy and I wasn't going to waste the time to go look for it. So after giving the Mod Podge time to dry, I then took the bucket outside and sprayed it all over with the clear spray paint for a finish, a satin finish. And here it is. What do you think? I think that I love it. And it's hard to believe that it started out as that shiny galvanized dollar store bucket. And look at that crackle. I love crackle. And that's my favorite part about, well, I don't know, I think I love the rust as well. Now on to our third and final project. When I was cutting the 2x4s, I came across one that had a hole in it. This piece right here. So I cut it down to the shape of a house. And of course, with that hole in it, it naturally lended itself to becoming a birdhouse, right? And so I had some Mackenzie Child inspiration going on. I've been wanting to paint some checks. And so I painted, as you can see, the checks on top. I made some castings from some leaf, from molds that made with leaf shapes. And I applied those, I painted them green. And then I did the checks down at the bottom as well. I had the leaves at the top, and then I had a couple of leaves that were floating down the side of or it's the front, but on the left side of the hole, and as if they were just falling out of the trees. And this is where it was, but I didn't really like it, and mainly I couldn't find a transfer that I had that I thought would go well with it. All the ones of floral that I had were muted colors. I wanted something bright, maybe some red roses or something I thought would really pair well with the green, but I didn't have anything. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought, I don't really like this. So yeah, this is what I did. I painted over all that work, keeping those molds, but painting over the checks and everything else, and thinking to myself, what in the world have I done? Is this the right step to take? Are people going to think I'm crazy? I probably am, because I put some work into this, but to be honest, it's not the first time I've done something over. And it won't be the last. Have you ever gotten to a point on a project and think to yourself, this is not where I wanted it to go, this is just not happening, and then completely redo it? So I'm not 100% certain that I did the right thing, but it is what it is. So let's move forward and see what I did. I pulled out my Sweet Pickins milk paint in the color Flour Sack. Mixed that together with equal parts of water, gave it a stir, let it sit for about 10 minutes so it would thicken up, and then I started brushing it all over front, back, sides of this birdhouse. After the first coat, I got my hairdryer to force the cracking, and as we all know, I'm impatient, but it really does help the cracking, as I've already mentioned. And then after that first coat, I added another coat. It's amazing how much from the first to the second coat of milk paint, what a big drastic change it can be. And that was really all that I needed to do was the 2 coats. After letting it dry thoroughly, I got sandpaper and just started going over all the edges bringing back some of that black paint showing through. It also brought out just a little bit of chipping from the milk paint, but mostly I got crackling. Oh, see, so there's what it looked like. There were the images that I had, or the transfer images that I had, and now I'm reminded that not only were they not the brighter colors that I would have preferred, none of the floral transfers that I had actually fit well enough onto the front either. So that was another reason, and probably the primary reason, because looking back at this, those colors are not that bad with it. But so back to version 2, I pull out the transfers that was from the first pack that I used on the bucket, and giving this a fall look with those transfers. And I really like this one particular flower just on the front, and for a little bit I almost thought of just leaving it at that. I decided before I went any further with transfers that I needed to apply some dark oil wax to the molds on the top, or the castings, the leaf castings at the top, because I wanted to see what they were going to look like. Ooh, I put it all over. I can't believe I did that, especially considering that I was going to add more transfers. You shouldn't apply wax before you apply transfers. I'll take care of that when I start applying more transfers. At this point, I'm not even sure that I'm going to. But anyway, those leaf castings are just not doing it for me. So I pull out some of that green paint that I had used on earlier and just kind of dry brush around on the leaves, thinking that might help. The oil wax didn't do so much for it. And that's when I decide to take my scraper and remove all of the molds. That was 3 larger molds that were along the top edge, and then the 2 that were floating down from the top. Yes, I used that flat edge tool and removed all of those. Sanded it just a little bit to smooth out anything residue that was left behind. Went over all of those areas where the moldings had been, or where the castings had been. Painted that. Second coat. This is all, of course, the same chalk paint. And I cast 2 different birds to apply to the front. I started with just the one, and here I'm placing some of the transfers without applying them. I'm just placing them to try to get an idea of how I can sit that bird in there. I want the bird to look like it's sitting on one of the limbs of the transfer, or of the flower. And I brought in a second bird casting to sit around that hole. It too is kind of perched on a branch. And with both of these castings, I use Tite Bond Quick and Thick and spread it all along the back to make sure I have good adherence. I give that glue and the air dry clay some time to dry, and then I come back in with the Sweet Pickins dark oil wax and start applying it all over the entire birdhouse as well as the birds. And that's all I do to the birds. I did not even paint them. I just applied the oil wax on them, and then, as with any kind of wax, you go back and wipe back and just leave the oil wax, or the darker oil wax, down in the details of the crackling, or in this case also the bird castings. After letting that oil wax sit for probably about 15 or 20 minutes, I then started removing it using a clean shop towel, and I used a wet wipe to wipe off the oil wax from the birds, leaving it in the details, but pulling back most of it from the bird itself. I decided to add a few more transfers to the side, so I sanded back so that oil wax would not be on there, and applied a few more transfers. I also took Spanish moss and pushed it through that little hole for the finishing touch to this project, and here it is. Tell me what you think. Did I make the right choice in switching it over? Should I have left it the way it was? I'm still not sure, but you tell me what you think. And here are all three projects. I do think they all go together well, so I am happy with that. Definitely the bucket is my favorite. Probably the three sunflower projects come in second, and then the birdhouse third. Let me know how you rank your favorites. And friends, we've come to an end of this video. I am so grateful to you for sticking with me all this time. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to my channel. Find me on my other social media pages and come back for more. I hope I'll see you soon.